Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In the last several episodes, we've talked a lot about how the internet actually works. And in this episode, I want to change the subject a little bit and talk a little bit about who the hackers actually are, and specifically the threats they potentially represent. So let's talk a little bit more about those cybersecurity threats. Our society is increasingly reliant on information technology for all sorts of everyday activities. These include things like banking and our retail services, but also includes things like transportation, as well as healthcare systems, and many, many others. The important thing to remember is that each one of these sectors have several vulnerabilities in the various systems they rely on, and those vulnerabilities can be exploited by hackers. So let's first, instead of using the word hacker, let's use a much more formal term. And I want to use the term threat actor. And the reason we want to talk about a threat actor is that a cyber attack is orchestrated by a person or an organization. That person or organization is motivated by a purpose. And it's really important for us to understand that not all threat actors are focused on the same things. Some are motivated by financial gain, others maybe by national security interests. We need to understand the differences between those various threat actors. They execute those operations utilizing available resources, and they leverage tactics, tools, and processes that vary. This is an important distinction because not all threat actors have the same level of capability. We need to understand that if we're to get to the bottom of the real cybersecurity challenges that we face. So let's talk a little bit more about the people and the organizations behind this hacking. So as we discussed, cyber attacks are executed by specific people who act either independently or as part of a broader collective or group. There are lone actors that may train and execute attacks based on their own internal motivations or as part in an effort to gain additional reputation. However, groups of actors operating as an organization might execute attacks for financial, political, or even nationalist purposes. We need to understand the differences that each one of these threat actors represent. So let's talk a little bit more about motivation. Threat actors are motivated to conduct cyber attacks for a variety of different purposes. They include things like curiosity, even reputation. There are financial incentives in some cases, political activism, terrorist activity, and finally even national security considerations. And it's important to understand that these motivations influence different groups to conduct certain types of attacks against certain organizations. So if we want to understand the broad set of threats facing things like critical infrastructure, we need to understand who the threat actors are and what they're motivated to achieve. So let's talk a little bit more about resources. Not all threat actors have the same level of resources that they need in order to execute a specific type of cyber attack. The ability of threat actors to execute effects is constrained by certain things. First, they're constrained by their own skill level. Are these threat actors, have they been practicing for years? Have they been trained by a government organization? Or are they learning their skills simply on YouTube? It matters. Second, the tools that they're using matter. Are these tools that have been developed by others that people are commonly using around the world and therefore they're known by defenders? That might limit their effectiveness. Or are the tools custom made? Are they leveraging capabilities and techniques that no one has ever seen before? The processes and techniques that threat actors use are really important. Are they well known by defenders, or are they novel? And then finally, the financial resources that they can bring to bear. matter. If you're a threat actor and you're interested in attacking a piece of critical infrastructure, let's call it a natural gas pipeline, there are very specific technologies that are leveraged in those types of systems. So if you're a threat actor and you want to attack those systems, you're likely having to go out and purchase those systems, gain access to those systems, and they're not necessarily cheap. They may run several $100,000. So if you're living in your parents' basement, chances are you're not going to have a couple $100,000 lying around in order for you to actually mess around and identify the exploitation potential in that particular system. So here's an example in the banking sector, a handful of examples. First, there were Iranian attacks against 46 major financial institutions in 2011. We've also seen attacks by a North Korean hacking group that led to the compromise of $100 million out of Bangladeshi central bank accounts in 2015. But it's not simply about attacks against the financial sector. We also see attacks in the energy sector. Examples might include power disruptions in the Ukraine, denial of service attacks against customer service phone lines in Detroit, Michigan, and even compromise of data residing on electric utility computers in Vermont. We also see several attacks coming against the retail sector. Examples include access to specific point-of-sale systems. These are the systems in which you take your credit card and you hand it to the cashier and they swipe it for you. So attacks against those particular components happen with a regular occurrence. These include compromise of credit card numbers at Home Depot, Target, Eddie Bauer, and several more. Finally, denial of service attacks against retail websites are actually quite common. Even the transportation sector has seen a whole host of cyber attacks. These include things like destruction of the cargo management system at Maersk Lines, the largest container ship company in the world. We've seen attacks against ticketing kiosks for the San Francisco Muni system. And even rail systems itself compromised in the Ukraine. And finally, even government is affected. Examples of cyber attacks include things like billing and record management systems disrupted in Baltimore. We've seen court docket systems completely disrupted in the city of Atlanta. Even U.S. government employee records compromised at the Office of Personnel Management.
Well, the United States suspects hackers in China are responsible for a government data breach that impacted about 4 million people's records. It's described as one of the largest thefts of government data ever seen. Now, the FBI first detected the breach in April at the Office of Personnel Management, which functions as the federal government's human resource department, managing background checks, pension payments, and job training. China denies being responsible.
So what are some of the takeaways? Well, cyber attacks are conducted by individuals either acting alone or as part of a larger group. But it's specifically to achieve a goal, and that's a really important point to understand. They leverage tools, techniques, and processes to achieve those end goals. And finally, they're constrained. They're constrained by the lack of resources, tools, and skill. Now, all of this together is fundamentally important because some threat actors are more capable than others. And as we go through the next few episodes, we'll talk a lot about the different types of threat actors and the constraints that they face. I hope to see you next time.